Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Peace be with you. Inshallah, everything is okay. We can start with this short talk on racism and Muslims and have two words to say to us to try to understand in which way we have to deal with the challenge of racism within our community. Because, yes, we are always reminding our brothers and sisters around the world of the beauty of Islam, that there is nothing in Islam that can promote or justify any kind of racism. Now we have to deal with the reality, and this is what I wanted to tackle today in this talk when it comes to racism. Let me start with a short introduction, and there are three main points I think that we have to be aware of, or to keep in mind when we are talking about racism and when we are talking about racism, not only within our community, but when we deal with it in our contemporary context. First, we have people saying you have to be very cautious with the notion of racism because scientifically racism or races don't exist. And this is right. You know, scientifically speaking, there is nothing like race. We know now that this is wrong, and that the way we have been, or we are constituted with our genetics and everything has nothing. Races don't exist. Now, when we speak about racism, there is something which is the scientific definition of a word and the connotation or the accepted meaning of the word in our contemporary discussion. So when we are talking about racism today and saying that there is something that we have to deal with called racism, it means when we are targeting somebody for who he or she is. It has to do with her or his color, her or his religion, her or his nationality, for example, so, or origin. So we need to go from the scientific wrong definition or right definition, but not the accepted definition in our discussion when it comes to racism in our society. And when we are talking about this, say, okay, whenever you are targeting somebody because of his color or her color, because of her or his religion, because of her or his origin, we are talking about racism, and this is not acceptable. So this is a point which is important in our discussion now, because it's also something that we have to deal with anti-Semitism. And the people are saying, you know, Semite, we are Semite as Arabs, for example, so anti-Semitism, where we are talking about targeting the Jews, is wrong. Scientifically, it's right that anti-Semitism is not the right word, because Semites are not only Jews or Hebrews, it also has to do with Arabs. Now, in our common discussion in our societies, when we talk about anti-Semitism, we are talking about targeting the Jews because of who they are, because they are Jews. So this is unacceptable, and I have been repeating this for years. Anti-Semitism is anti-Islamic. So it's a type of racism here that we have to deal with, and we have to understand in which we deal with this notion in our world, in our society. Now, there is also something that we have to add, is racism we can have racism and have racists. When we talk about racism, it's also something that is very often built on a theory. It has been theorized. For example, the inferiority of the black people, or the African people, or the Arabs in some situation under colonization. You have Orientalists, and you have thinkers who have, through history, theorized the fact that there are superiority with, you know, the Western civilization is superior to the other civilizations. So this theorization is part of what we are dealing with when we talk about racism. It's not that we are only dealing with racists, because you can have, for example, you have racists who are against white people or Chinese people or black people. That's fine, and this is everywhere. Now, the fact that we go from, individuals who are racist to racism, it's where we go from a perception to a theory. So the theory here is how to theorize, or do you theorize the fact that, for example, there is a superiority of the Western civilization going to Africa to civilize the people. Why? Because they are inferior. Because Islam is an inferior religion. Because Christianity has or must have the upper hand on the future of civilization. So this has been theorized, and in a very scientific field, you have very bright minds and very smart people talking about this and developing this. So they are very often well received in the West, but we know in Africa, we know in Asia, we know in other countries and continents how this has been or was harmful towards the people who are living in the societies there, with Native Americans, for example, and now they are very much mobilized about this, because we know through history how they were perceived as inferior, that even their lands were just not theirs, that we can take them out of this superiority. So we need to understand that racism is also based on theories. So this is why, for example, when the people are saying, but there is a racism against white people, we have to be very cautious, because there is no real theories that are explaining the inferiority of the white people. Not the same way as you have with black people, Arabs, other religions, people in Australia, native or First Nations, for example, in Canada, Native Americans, or Aborigines in Australia. This was not exactly the case, with maybe one or two exceptions, and we have to say this. If you deal with, for example, the theories that were produced by the Nation of Islam during the 20th century, which was what Malcolm X at the beginning was supporting, there was a theory of the white people being inferior or being the devil. And this was theorized in a way which we can talk about racism here against white people at that time. Now things are evolving. We still have people who are theorizing this kind of perception of the white evil man, and we have also to say that has nothing to do with the Islamic message and has nothing to do with the universal values that we are sharing with our brothers and sisters in humanity. Having said that, there is another last notion that we have to talk about, because it's used in a way which is sometimes misunderstood. When we talk about phobia or Islamophobia, some people are saying, oh, phobia means to be scared of. So when I'm saying that I am Islamophobic, it means that I'm scared of Islam. But this is not, once again, you have the scientific notion and you have the used and the connotation. When we speak about Judeophobia or Islamophobia and even homophobia, we don't say that we are just scared with, for example, homosexuals, or scared of Jews, or scared of Muslims. We are talking about a type of racism here that we need to get. It's when we are targeting people for who they are, what they think, and their origins or whatever. But here it's not. It has nothing to do with being scared of. It has to do with developing a sentiment, a rejection, a discrimination, and a kind of racism, as it were, that we were talking about. So having said this, as the first step in our way of dealing with the terminology here, we need to get to the first part of our talk. And the first part has to do with the ideal. So very often you talk to Muslims and they are telling you, you know what, in Islam there is no racism. That's true. In Islam there is no space, no room for any type of racism. This is unacceptable from the very beginning. So that's true. Now, it's not because Islam is not accepting and in any way justifying racism that we don't have Muslims being racists. quite the opposite. And unfortunately, if we look at our history and we look at our societies today, we cannot just escape it. We cannot avoid the reality, the hard reality, the dire reality of Muslim being racist within the community in a way which is not acceptable. So let me just start with reminding us with some of the principles of Islam. What we find in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we gave dignity to human beings, all the human beings, black, white, red, whatever, men and women, the same. So وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. And what we find in the Surah Al-Hujurat is يا أيها الناس, O people, إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. O you people, all the people, we have created you from a male and a female, and we have made you nations and tribes in order for you to know each other. The best among you is the one who is the most love-fearing, the most pious. Meaning that it has nothing to do with your color, it has nothing to do with your origin, it has nothing to do with what is visible. What is the difference between you? What means that you have a value has to do with your heart, has to do with this reverential love that you have towards God. In, of course, our reference as Muslims, because we are talking about the reality of believing in God. So this is something which is to be repeated, and this is coming from the Quran. If we know now, we go to what the Prophet ﷺ said. There are many instances, many ahadith where he was talking about this and saying لا فرق بين عربي ولا أعجمي إلا بالتقوى. There is no difference between an Arab and a stranger or somebody who is not an Arab, except by this piety, this reverential love that you have towards God. And when he was to leave the community, this was the last sermon, Hajj al-Wada', when he was talking to the people for the last time, and he said, Ya ayyuhan nas, again, all the people, Ala inna rabbakum wahid, your Lord, your God, it's one. There is no one except they accept God. This is the starting out. وَإِنَّ أَبَاكُمْ وَاحِدٌ, and your father is one. وَلَا فَضْلَ لِأَعْجَمِيٍّ عَلَى عَرَبِيٍّ إِلَّا بِالتَّقْوَى وَلَا لِأَعْجَمِيٍّ عَلَى عَرَبِيٍّ إِلَّا بِالتَّقْوَى. This is what he was going to say at the end. وَلَا لِأَحْمَرَ عَلى أَسْوَدَ وَلَا لِأَسْوَدَ عَلى أَحْمَرَ إِلَّا بِالتَّقْوَى. لَا فَضْلَ, there is no superiority. Nothing is here to be said about the reality of who you are except bittaqwa. So he's repeating when he was going to leave the community what was the essential teaching of Islam. And this is also what we heard from Umar radiallahu anhu when he was talking about Abd ibn al-As in a very specific situation with a Coptic that he was mistreating. And he was talking about them. How could you treat the people and put them and transform them into servants when they have been born free? That's also something which we have to remember in our tradition, and coming very far from the very beginning with the Prophet ﷺ and all the tradition with Umar radiallahu anhu saying متى استعبدتم الناس وقد ولدتهم أمهاتهم أحرارا. How could you just justify the fact that you transformed this into slavery when they have been born and their mother gave birth to them free? They were free. That's also something which is the essential of our understanding of our message as Muslim. Now, all this is great and fine, and we know how Islam is teaching us the reality of one God, one humanity, equality, freedom, and justice. That's the way it should be You can be, and this is, by the way the Muslims, when they arrive in different countries and different continents, they were welcomed very often because of this sense of there is no difference between us, and we are coming from the same father, and we are part of the same family. This is what Islam is teaching us, making it impossible for us to theorize anything which has to do with a superiority of a specific race over another one, a specific color over another one, and a specific country over another one. Because the very difference between us has to do with our heart, has to do with the invisible that only God and ourselves could know in our reality as human beings. Now, we know this, and we have now to face the reality of our history. Because if we look at the reality from the very beginning, Islam is coming to the Arabs, and the Arabs were knowing the language, al-fasaha, the language, and they were coming from the same culture as the Prophet ﷺ, even though, remember, that the culture of the Muslims in Mecca was not exactly the same as the culture of the Muslims with Al-Ansar, and they had from the very beginning, tensions. And remember that even we were talking about Umar ibn al-Khattab, Umar ibn al-Khattab had problems with the Medinian culture as compared to what he was used to experience in Mecca, and especially with women. So, but from the very beginning, when the Muslims and the reality of the Islamic empire, so to speak, at the beginning expanded, and you had Muslims coming from Persia and coming from new horizons, we had first tensions that people were saying, oh, they are not really knowing Arabic, they don't know the reality of our culture, as if, because the Quran was revealed in Arabic, the only true culture was the Arab culture, or the culture of the Arabs within the specific, within the peninsula. And we know that this is wrong. That's not the reality of it. This is not the way we have to deal with it. So because the Persians were not talking or speaking Arabic as the Arabs, there were first tensions, to the point that they were very much respected. Look at the great scholars that we had later, like Abu Hamid al-Ghazali and others, who were not Arabs from the very beginning. So when they mastered the language, they were respected for that. And then step by step, the different cultures. And the universality of Islam should be understood that way. So it's one religion with a set of common principles, accepting the diversity of cultures. So that's also something that we need to get. But the tensions came from the very beginning. So it happened at that time. And remember that through all our history, the leadership of the Muslim empire, or the Islamic communities around the world, remember, for example, the tensions that you have people, Arabs and scholars, great scholars even, who theorize the fact within Islam that if the Ottoman Empire, or if the Islamic civilization started to regress, this was because the leadership was no longer in the hands of the Arabs, because it was coming to the Turks or the Seljukids and others. So this is things that we heard until the beginning, up to now, by the way, but until the beginning of the 20th century, we had people saying, what is happening with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire was because the leaders were Turks and not very Arabs. They didn't know. And remember that we had a great figure, Lawrence d'Arabie, as you said, Lawrence of Arabia, the one who was sent by the French and the British, and these people who went to do what, in fact? To divide the Muslims and to say to the Arabs at the beginning of the 20th century, you have to take again the leadership of the Islamic civilization and the Islamic communities. And they were successful in pushing the Arabs against the Turks to divide from within. Based on what? Based on this perception the Turks have no legitimacy, and there is no justification, and they have not the knowledge to lead the Muslims. While at the same time, what we heard from some Turks is that the Arabs, because of their culture, were counterproductive towards Islam. You have also people theorizing this in a way which was very negative. We can't avoid dealing with these realities because, in fact, our weaknesses comes from our internal divisions, and the powerful towards the Muslims is the one who can use or nurture these divisions. And this is what happened in our history. But we were not to be colonized in such a way if we were not colonizable, as Malik bin Abi said. Because in fact we were ready for it. We were ready to hear things like this, that Arabs are not like Turks and Turks are not exactly like black people and black people are not like Asian people, and to nurture a sense of this internal division. That's unacceptable, but it happened. It happened in our history, it happened in our societies and within our civilizations up to recently and up to now. So this also is something that we need to get. And remember, during the Abbasid, what we had is the revolt, the rebellion of the Zenj, which were people who were slaves during that time. And remember, this is the 9th century. And it's maybe because of this that Al-Hallaj, who was, we were told it's only because he said An al-Haq, he was a Sufi, that he was killed. Not only. He was also involved, politically speaking, with Al-Zenj, and he was supporting their rebellion against the power because they were treated as slaves. And this is why also it was unacceptable for the power at that time to accept such resistance in the name of freedom, in the name of the slave, saying no to the Abbasid power, structure of power at that time. Don't forget that. This is our history. This is the dark side of our history that we have to deal with. And we are not going to deal with our present, with the challenges of the present, if we don't look at this the right way. Because just to keep on repeating the ideal principles of Islam and not to look at the not so ideal behavior of Muslims is not going to help us. And to idealize the past is not helping us to reform the present and the future. That's the reality, and we need also to deal with this when we look at our history. In Andalusia, we keep on repeating, you know what, it was great, and all the religions, and Muslims, and Jews, and Christians were all together. No, yes, that's fine, but at that time, we also had a market for slaves during this period of time. So you had slavery in Andalusia. And as we know, Islam and the Prophet ﷺ had to deal with slavery. But the point was that the whole process, the teaching within history of Islam is this has to stop. You have to go to an end with slavery. Because the natural state of human beings, and to be a good believer, just to be a believer, means that you have to be free. So slavery was a fact, and it was a process that has to go to an end, just to free the people, to the point that if you are a sinner, you are dealing with your own sins, you know that at one point, to free yourself from your sin, you have to free a slave from his condition or her condition. Look at this. Your personal spiritual journey has to do with that freedom. And the point here is that you need to get this out of the Islamic teaching. So anyone who is telling you Islam is justifying slavery is wrong. Islam and Muslims from the very beginning had to deal with slavery as a system, and step by step change the mindset of the Muslims in order for them to go to free the people. And it happened, as you know, with Bilal. And even the Prophet ﷺ, once he was with a companion, and the companion Awzar was saying to Bilal, say, Ya Ibn al-Aswad, son of the black, and he was so upset. Say, you are bringing us back to the time of ignorance, al-Jahiliyyah. That's not Islam. So it happened with, even Bilal radiallahu anhu had to deal with this. So through our history, And within, the great, period of time that we had to, we are celebrating everywhere, don't look only at this great periods of time. Look also at what the Muslims did in Andalusia. This was the reality in Egypt, and the situation with the Mamluk. Mamluk means really the people who are possessed, under the possession. They are all slaves who rebel, and this also has to do with the reality in Egypt, the reality of slavery in Tunisia, the reality of slavery in Morocco. Until the 19th century, you have the market of slaves in Morocco. So this is our reality, and so we cannot just say, Islam has nothing to do with racism and slavery. Behind this, and even, it was not only black people, the people were also coming from Eastern Europe, and they were slaves. So yes, slavery is not racist, but the justification of slavery is also based on a time of racism in the way you look at the black people, you look at the Asian people, in the way, for example, in China, in India. Look at what is happening now with the Dalit, the pariah, as we are calling them in India. The way, if you are a Muslim and a Dalit, and in the system, too many Muslims did accept the reality of the Hindu system of castes and relying on it as Muslims. While if there is something that is unacceptable per se from an Islamic perspective, is to say this caste system cannot be accepted. You don't have people who are considered per se as impure, and others as just idealized, in a way, the brown, things like this. This system for us is a counter system. That's not acceptable. So if now, as Muslims living in India, you end up accepting this system, it's as if you are accepting a kind of a racist system, a systemic racist reality that you have to deal with, and this is not acceptable. So this has to be and must be known. We need to know our history, and we need to know how some Arabs were in fact dealing with slavery, and they were dealing with black people in a way which is unacceptable in the sub-Saharan reality, in Senegal, in Mali, in other countries. And look at what happened in Libya recently. We just heard, and this is a fact, no one can deny this, that some in Libya were selling black people who were coming from the African countries in a way which is not acceptable. Not acceptable. So we need to be clear on this, that within our communities as Muslims, and first, within our history, there are realities that are dark, that are very negative, that have nothing to do with the principles I was talking about at the beginning of this talk, and that we have to deal with this in a way which is clear. Now, if we come to the contemporary reality, because there was a hope for us, we come to the West, we live in the United States of America, we live in Europe, we live in other countries, and hopefully we are coming to come together and live together and go beyond this, come back to the principles of Inna Rabbakum Wahid wa Inna Abakum Wahid, the same one God and the same Father. Unfortunately, this is not what we see in our communities throughout the world. Very often you have mosques for the Arabs, and sometimes even among the Arabs is not clear. If you come from Algeria, it's not exactly like if you come from Morocco. If you are an Egyptian, sometimes you have another perception. So let it be okay. The Arabs can come together. But now, where are the black people within our mosques? Where are the black people? And sometimes it comes to even the converts, because the converts are not exactly, true Muslims, and we are questioning the authenticity of their faith. So yes, it's not always this, and things are moving and improving, and especially with the last events in the United States of America and even in Europe, now we come to a better understanding that we are all targeted and we are all the victims of the same structural and systemic racism. That's fine, but it's very often in opposition to something which is happening to us. Now it has to be a dynamic, it has to be a positive understanding, a constructive understanding of who we are and who we want to be in the future. Because up to now, you go to some Turk mosque, even in some cities and countries, you have, oh, this is the Turk, the mosques of the Turk, the mosque of the Moroccan, the mosque of the Egyptian, of the Arabs, and even the Asian people. This is the reality that we have in our communities today, and we cannot deny this. Very often we don't come together. Once I was in 2000, it was in 2000, I think 5 or 4, I was going to a convention in the United States at the same day in Chicago, the same day, at 1 hour, 1.5 hour, from one another. I was going to the ISNA convention, and at the same time there were Warith al-Din, the black people, the Afro-American having their own convention. You go to this and you go to the other. All are talking about the universal message of Islam. Here there are mainly Arabs and there they are mainly black people. What's that? What's that? How could you talk about universality of Islam in such a way? I experienced this myself. I enter into the United States of America mainly, being closer to the black African American because of the relationship that he had with Malcolm X, Malik Shabazz, radiallahu anhu, rahimahullah. So this is also something that, and then you come and you see many migrants and Arabs sharing the American dream and forgetting about the black and African American Muslims' nightmare. This is what they were saying. And now coming to celebrate Malcolm X while they are so absent, so much absent, so silent when it comes to what the black people and the African American Muslims and people of other faiths, by the way, are facing within the system when it comes to racism. So we have to stop celebrating, figures and charismatic names. Oh, we like Malcolm X, we like Martin Luther King. That's fine, but what about the people? What about the people who are in jail now in the United States of America? What about the people who are in jail in Europe and they are facing racism day in, day out? So celebrating the icons to be neglectful towards the ordinary people, that's not the Islamic message. That's not what we have to be and who we have to be in our society. But this is what is happening now. So there is a trap in this celebration of icons, celebration of charismatic leaders. Oh, I love so much Malcolm X. Come tell me, how do you love this anonymous black brother or sister who could be a Muslim or could be a Christian or even a Jew or whatever? What is your take on this? What are you doing to change the situation? Except to come when, for example, there is a media coverage. So we are very quick to be against racism when the media are covering this. I'm sorry, racism has nothing to do with the media coverage. Racism is a daily reality. So we have to be involved, we have to be part of the process, and to be part, it's not only to come now, oh yes, I like Black Lives Matter. They have been working for the last 6-7 years, and before them, all the tradition of people saying, I'm somebody in the society or during the 50s and the 60s, all these people have been working on this. So it's not to like Barack Obama because he was black, it's just to check what he was doing or not doing for the sake of an equal society and freedom within the society. So I think that this is where, as Muslims, we need to challenge ourselves, we need to be self-critical, because that's not going to work like this. It's just not to criticize everything, and every time we come to talk about Islam, we talk about the principles, and we forget about dealing or talking about the reality of the Muslim behavior when it comes to this. So this is the reality of racism within. Some Arabs, they don't like the black people. They think that they don't have the knowledge and the language to know about Islam. So they are very much, dismissing and looking down to them. That's wrong, and it's the reality between black and Arabs, and it goes two ways, because some black people, African American people, they are just upset with the Arabs, and they were also developing a kind of a discourse which is a racist discourse. You have it between Turks and Arabs, and you have it in India also, in between Asian and Arabs. That's the reality that we need to get within our community, to the point that with the Nation of Islam during the last century up to now, some developed a real racist theory towards the white people, which is once again not acceptable. And you know that Malcolm X, rahimahullah, after his pilgrimage, changed his mind and changed his understanding and understood now it's one humanity. He came in fact to the words of the Prophet ﷺ, Inna abakum wahid. Inna abakum wahid. Your father is one, and if you follow God's path, you remember that you are part of the same family. Now, look also at what is happening in some Arab countries today. When we talk about migrant workers coming from Philippines or India or Nepal, the way they are treated in some Arab societies, the petromonarchies or the Gulf countries, is just new slavery. That's not acceptable. We have also to challenge this and say, how come? Because you have money? Because you know there is always a relationship between racism and economic power. So it's easy to justify a racist attitude because you have the money and the power. So it's a double reality, it's a double construction, richness, power, and racism. And this is also what we are doing. It's because the people are Muslims or people of other faiths, the way they are dealt with is just unacceptable as well, and we have to deal with this. You know, let me just quote here some figures that we had. You know, there is a Muslim website in the UK called 5 Pillars, and what they are just saying, and this was published, you know, just on the wake of what happened in the United States of America with George Floyd, and also what happened in France and in other countries. And it's good to see that we have now, you know, reaction coming from universities, coming from the governments when it comes to celebrating all these people who were supporting colonization, supporting racist theory. That's very good that now all this is challenged everywhere. But now come to our community. When you have, for example, 53% of participants, black participants, felt that they generally did not belong to their local mosque. Half of the black people in the UK don't feel that they belong to their mosque. 84% felt that they did not belong to their university's Islamic society. 84. So they are in university. They are in university. They are students. They are part of, you know, the more educated people, and 84% of them, they don't feel that they are part of the Islamic society and the student dynamic there. 63% felt that they did not belong to the UK Muslim community. 63% of the black people, Muslims, they don't feel that they are part of the community, and they also almost half of the Muslims, 48% of participants said they had faced anti-black discriminations or colorism within a UK mosque or religious setting. These are figures that are just unbelievable. That's non-acceptable at all. And this is happening now in the UK, and it's true in the US, it's true in all the European countries, it's true in Australia, in New Zealand. That's the reality of it. And we have to deal with this reality. For example, 79% of participants said they had faced anti-black discrimination and colorism within a secular setting in the UK. So it's almost the same figures when it comes to the way they are treated within the community and the way they are treating outside. And they are facing something which is quite interesting, is not only racism coming from Arabs, but also coming from Asian people. It's as if in the UK, Asian and Arabs are having the upper hand, and they are rejecting the black. And add to this now, and if you talk to the Arab people, very often they are completely separated from the Asian people. And if you go to the Asian people, they don't really always speak good about the Arabs. So that's the reality of a community where, for example, you go in France and you will find exactly the same reality. Divisions, soft or hard racism, with many racists, all of them saying Islam is against racism, but still they are Muslims and they are indulging in such behavior. We have to deal with this. We have to deal with this, and we have to start by reforming ourselves in the way we deal with this reality, and to start with something which is, let us come back to the principles of Islam. Let us come back and make it clear that it's not by repeating with your mind the principles that you are going to translate this into reality. In fact, if you have to deal with racism, it's an inner jihad. It's a personal jihad. Any one of us could have this, perception, dark side. It could happen. So to change this with your heart, to change this with your mind, and to change this with your life, because some, people that I like, for example, when, I'm coming from Egypt, in Cairo, when you speak about people coming from Sudan, the dark scene is not really good, it's not nice. You have to find a woman or man with a white or a light skin. Look, this is the reality. So when we come to the principles of Islam, we need to indulge into an inner, personal, intimate jihad, to go beyond this, to be able to face our own, weaknesses with this, the own realities, things that we heard in the past, things that are said, when you say, for example, oh, the Turks are like this, the Algerians are like this, the Egyptians are like this, the black people are like this, stop it. Because that's not true. That's not true. There is nothing like this. There is, yes, cultural features, that's fine, but a definition of the other, a discrimination based on who you are, because who you are is this, and I define you in such a way, that's not the way forward. That's not the way we have to deal with this. So, having said this is the starting point, and we have to face this within our community. So if now in your mosque, in your small community, you see people having this type of, statements or perceptions or impression, you have to deal with this, and you have to be an active actor, an active agent within the community to stop the way you talk, because the way you talk says something about the way you think, and the way you think will have an impact in the way you behave. And if you are silent facing racism, it means that you are implicitly accepting things. And don't tell me that you are not a racist, because when it comes to the media, and when it comes to George Floyd, and when it comes to Black Lives Matter, now you are involved. If you are involved now and silent in between two media coverages, it means that there is a problem. There is a problem in the way you deal with this as Muslims. So now we also have to deal with this, and not to play an identity against the other within the community. We have to be much more universalist in our way of dealing with this at the local level, with our brothers and sisters, our sisters and brothers coming from different communities. Now it's time to talk to one another. Now it's time to come together. Now it's time to know what are the social challenges that we are facing within our community. This is what we have to do all together, not when the media are talking, but what the reality is showing itself, is revealing who we are and what are our weaknesses within the community. So this is also something that we need to get from within as Muslims. As Muslims, it's important to be involved, and there are so many people who are doing so good things at the local level, at the grassroots level, that we need to deal with them and also be involved. And as I said, once again, stop idealizing icons and come to the heart and difficult reality within the community, because there are so many people now, black people, African American in the United States, or even black people in Western countries, or in Africa they are dealing with, and in India today they are dealing with this identity politics and targeting the Muslims. And there is something called Islamophobia. There is a racism against Muslims, but not only there is racism against black people, there is racism against Indian people, or a segment within the Indian people. And in China today we also have to deal with this. So it's not only to come and to speak out when we Muslims are the victims. No, we are the victims when any human being is a victim. Period. That's it. This is the very meaning of what we are talking about when it comes to our Islamic reference. So we have to be involved. So to start with ourselves, to deal within our community, and to stop any kind of identity politics, to try to be more universal in the way we deal with our mosque, to be able to go to other mosques where the people are not our people, and to stop talking about our people celebrating universality when we are very exclusive in the way we deal with the Islamic principle. And also to be here and involved in everything which has to do with, for example, the what we call systemic racism. And systemic racism has to do with three things where at least we have to be involved. Education. Which type of education you give the people in different areas in the society, in different regions, in different settings, because there are double standards. All the schools, there are schools for privileged people and schools for black people, or for poor people within the society. This is the reality. So we need to deal with education. We need to deal with the social system, equal opportunity when it comes to work, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to the job market, when it comes to the house market. Not to have people, segregated and say, okay, this is why. And for example, all what happened during the Reagan's time when, cracks and all this was, there was this drug for the poor black people, and they end up being in jail and exploited in jail even. But do you have drugs for the rich people in Hollywood? They can just go for it, but they're not going to be suspected of anything. It's not the same with the African American. It's not the same with the poor people. And this is happening everywhere in the West. So we have to be aware. We have to wake up and say, no, we are not going to accept this. When it comes to education, when it comes to social equality and social opportunities and equal opportunities in the job market, in the housing market. And then also when it comes to prison. So it's very strange that the Muslims are so silent when it comes to prison. When you know how much you are more likely to be imprisoned when you are black and we are poor in the Western society. And we keep on just, okay, when someone is killed, we speak. But when so many are discriminated, we are silent. That's, I'm sorry, a kind of hypocrisy, a lack of courage in the way we deal with it, in the way we deal with our own society. So don't make your voice heard when all the voices are coming together. The most important thing in our society is also to be the voice for the voiceless, to be the voice when there is no media, but there is the reality of discrimination in our daily life here. So this grassroots works, this dynamic that we are talking about, at the legal, at the social level, at the grassroots level, with our brothers and sisters and brothers coming from all the different horizons. This is where we have to come together. This is where we have to come together and to understand something, that your struggle here for more universality, black, Turks, Asian, Arabs coming together in the name of the same principles with Muslims and people of other faiths is also the way to understand the intersectionality of all your struggles. Because what you are doing in the United States, or doing in Europe, or doing everywhere, or in African countries, because so many of you are listening from Africa, this also has to do with international struggles for more justice. It has to do with racism towards Palestinians. It has to do with racism towards Chinese Muslims. It has to do with racism towards Tibetans. It has to do with racism against South African black people. It's all connected. So your awareness here is a guarantee. It's for you the condition to be involved everywhere. So you have to understand the intersectionality. Even when it comes with, women's struggle, when we are against, women's discrimination in our society. So when you are poor, black, and a woman, these are added weaknesses or perceived as added features of discrimination. And it's the same with men, and even sometimes more with men when it comes to the prison system. This is where you have to be involved. This is where we have to come together as Muslims and to understand it has to do with school, it has to do with social opportunities, it has to do with the prison system, it has to do with what we are talking about when it comes to security and where the people should have to deal with it. This is where we have to come together. So let me conclude with 3 points. The first, as I said, it's important to know our principles as Muslims. It's important to know all what I mentioned at the beginning and come back to this. But don't come back to your principles by repeating them with your mind, but experience them with your heart. It's different. It's not the same. It's not the same. So there is this jihad in nafs. When we deal with, sometimes with poor people, sometimes with people other origins, people from other color, we have, and if the Quran is stressing on this, because we have this, it's very easy for a human being to deal with what is visible, while God is telling you your value is not in what is visible, it's the invisible, and the invisible is my knowledge, is not yours. So shut up on the visible, and come to the principles and what should make you a human being. So this is one. We also have to be self-critical with our own history. Stop idealizing the past. Look at the past the way it is, because at the end of the day, they were human beings like we are. And they had challenges to face like we are. They had to change their society like we have to do. This is the same reality. And by idealizing the past, we end up feeling that we cannot do what was done. And it's wrong, because in the best periods of time, you had weaknesses and people were struggling. So in Allah, لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغير ما بأنفسهم. In Allah, لا يغير ما بقوم. So nothing is going to change in one community حتى يغير حتى to the point that we have to understand that we have to change things ourselves. And it starts with ما بأنفسهم. بقوم is the collective community. بأنفسهم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم means this jihad in nafs, and then the jihad that is expanding within the society to make it more just, more free, more dignified, and more universal. So by doing this, knowing the principles, acknowledging the dark side of some period of time in our past, and our present, by the way, all what I said about what is the reality within the Muslim societies or within the Muslim communities now is also something that we need to get. So we have to face our own contradictions. We have to face our lack of courage, our lack of commitment. And let me tell you something. Sometimes the way we celebrate great names is just the proof and the revelation of how far we are from the real dynamics within our communities. That we have to deal with racism within our communities everywhere. We have to be courageous enough to get out of our comfort zone. My people, my mosque, my color, my country, my origin, and to come to my principles. I belong first to my principles, whatever my color, whatever my social status, whatever my origin, because this is the way I'm coming back to God as a human being, whatever my color, whatever my passport, whatever my money. But what is going to be essential is the quality of my heart and my behavior. Inshallah, don't forget to tell the people you love that you love them. Life is fragile. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi